Okay, well, welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee for June 13th, 2018. We're going to follow our regular agenda. First of all, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to make? Sounds like we don't have any announcements, so let's move on to the things tagged TSC agenda from across the organization. The first one is add allowed environmental node flags property 19335.
This shouldn't be on the agenda. I just removed it. It was added because someone thought we needed to, the TSC needs to approve all API additions, but we don't need to approve API additions to existing modules, so it can be removed.
Okay, I think that Rich had added it because he thought it was at an impasse at one point, right?
No.
Right, because I think that I see a question three days ago, are you still -1 on this? And so if I look at the, sorry, I'm going back to the minutes.
So Benjamin Gruberman added the label.
Sorry, I'm just looking, I'm pretty sure. So there's a comment, if you look at the comment, this one, Rich was saying he wished to agree, but Richurkin is still -1, so I don't think it can land without TSC approval, and basically asking us to look at it in detail. So I think that at least Rich thought that we should at least, well, did think we should have it on the agenda. In terms of progressing it, I don't know if we have anybody on the call who is, is in opposition and wants to discuss why. I do see a bunch of people in there like, well, I don't love it, but see why it would make sense.
Sorry, what was the issue number here?
It is 19335. I think at this point, yeah. So have people had a chance to take a look at it yet? I mean, I think Rich's other point was it's been open for 3 months. So he was hoping that we would help to, is that really, wait a sec, maybe I'm thinking of a different one on that front, so forget that. I guess it's been open since March, so.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it, to be honest. It's not very idiomatic. It's what documentation's for.
Yeah, I don't think I think that's certainly been already reflected in the discussion, and then with more discussion, some people said, but yeah, okay.
So we did land a somewhat similar API recently to list all of the internal modules that are available. There were people in the ecosystem who had tools that were constantly being broken every time we added APIs. So I could imagine for any tools that are like hooking up environment flags or wanting to know environment flags, that this offers a similar use case. But it does seem like people may have had an issue with the way this was specifically implemented.
I wonder if maybe we should invite Benjamin next time to come to the meeting. He basically says he's now willing to advocate for it because he's just driven into a very specific case where he understands why it's needed.
Well, doesn't the OP describe why it's needed? Like, so that you can know in process what flags you might be able to send to like a child node process?
So sorry, say that again, Jeremiah. That you're just stating what the reason is.
Well, that's the reason that the OP, like the original
Right.
poster gave for it, right?
Yep.
The whitelist of node optionsable flags, not counting V8 flags, correspond to the set of flags, the CLA, that a CLA application may want to pass along to a spawn node process.
I guess like one thing that's worth considering here is like this whitelist of flags, you know, is something that we already have in memory. Like this is already declared and all we're doing is, you know, exposing a way for it to be grabbed in userland. But like if you look at the diff, like that whitelist already exists.
Still need to add an API for. I mean, there's lots of things that exist in memory already, but.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. This is about API surface area. There's been a really strong advancement of API surface area recently. I'm not a fan, to be honest. These things have kind of minor justifications, often convenience. I'm not sure convenience is usually the best reason to expand the surface area that we have to support, test, that impacts every time we make a little change. Yeah, like I'm not going to hold this one up, but I'm not a fan.
Yeah, so this one at least in my mind has like a solid use case.
Ben does bring up an interesting point in like the first response though, that like it doesn't address V8 flags at all, and it's not a comprehensive list. The whitelist is not all of the flags that are potentially available in the runtime. But I would like to suggest that perhaps since we A, don't have quorum, and B, we don't have the stakeholders, that maybe we punt this to a future meeting.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like with the request for people to either chime into the GitHub and, you know, make more arguments there, but we need to keep it on the agenda for the next time. Okay. I'm just going to take a note there. Do we want to invite anybody to come and talk, like either the original poster or Benjamin to come and make the case, or do we think there's enough information in the issue itself?
I mean, to me, it almost sounds like really what we would want to see are use cases, like explicit use cases and more than one of like why this would be useful. And I think that that could help people make a better decision. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but like Rod, for example, if they were able to present to you a handful of use cases, even more use cases, would that help to appease your concerns of it just being kind of feature creep?
I mean, I can see the use case here for Mocha. I understand that, and I've got similar things have come up with Worker Farm before. But you know, it's like have your own whitelist. Just use a whitelist of flags that are allowed to be passed. It's not that hard, and we don't have that many flags. And then there's the point about the V8 flags. Like we can't be comprehensive in any way. And you think about the Mocha case and V8 flags. It is legitimate to be perhaps passing V8 flags into your unit tests.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't list the V8 flags, then that doesn't even solve their problem. They're still going to have to whitelist somehow, or fail, like running a test runner and having it fail because you passed the wrong flags. That's a fail. You failed your tests.
So then I guess a better question is there anyone in the meeting right now who would be willing to -1 this PR as it currently exists?
Yes, I think so. I think I was about to. Like, I don't really see the point in adding this if we can't also extend that to all possible flags that you could pass to a Node application, which includes V8 flags. The use case is already cut way less than you're going to have to use a manual whitelist for some situations, no matter what. I don't see why we would add such a thing if it doesn't cover that.
So I think that seems reasonable then. Like, I mean, if no one has in the issue itself, like raised an official objection, if someone's willing to object in there, we could see if we can get consensus around closing it. And if there isn't consensus around closing it, we can bring it back to the TSC with a more explicit, like with an actual stakeholder.
It looks like James and Anna might have thoughts on this. Anna's in the meeting. Wondering if either of those two would want to weigh in.
I'm here, but like I kind of like opted out of the whole discussion because it's not something that I'm that interested in to like fight whatever. Yeah.
Okay, this feels like it needs a TSC champion to push it forward, and maybe we just need to go fishing for that.
Okay, I'm just taking notes. Okay, so any more discussion on that one before we move on? Okay, so the next one then is 20242, adding Biko as a collaborator. Miles, you'd added that one.
Yeah, just wanted to raise awareness to everyone. It seems like everyone on the issue is now +1. And so just want to make sure everyone's on board with moving forward and adding Ben as a collaborator.
I don't think I had a +1, but +1 for me.
Great. I'm on the road for like the next week and I'm pretty busy. Is there anyone who could take up onboarding them? Okay, if there's no one in the issue, I'll take the action item of finding someone to onboard Ben. And if someone's not able to volunteer, I'll do so myself.
Okay.
I mean, you can ping the Node.js/onboarding team, right?
Okay. Now, actually, question for everyone, because I'm maybe not up to date on our process. We do not have quorum in this meeting. Are we still able to move forward with this nomination without us having quorum? Is it more of a formality to tell the TSC, or is that an official part of the process?
No, these are just announcements. They don't have quorum or anything.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just an FYI. As long as, it's followed our consensus seeking process in the issue itself, we're good.
Okay, great. So I'll ping the onboarding team.
Sounds good. Okay, the next issue then is tracking issue for updating TSC on board meetings, number 476. So Miles.
Nothing to add since like the last board meeting we had where the ComCom got the directorship. There's been work ongoing to just get their charter up to date, back and forth through legal and stakeholders, and just making sure, all the T's and I's and whatnot are figured out. That is that for it. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so next is strategic initiatives. So I'm just going to open that one up. And a list. Okay, so we don't have James, so I guess we'll skip HTTP2. Modules, how's modules going?
Modules are going well. We've gotten through a lot of the use cases, and I have a proposal for a potential like kind of holistic solution. And I know that some other people from the team are starting to put together some solutions as well. I opened a pull request today to add import.meta.require, which is one of the incremental improvements that would be necessary for the proposal that I made. We are also starting to talk about deadlines, because if we want to ship this without a flag, sometime before maybe 2020, it is something that we need to start thinking about. Since Node 8 goes end of life at the end of 2019, if we can get a working implementation not behind a flag with the version of V8 that we have inside of Node 10, which is very possible, and it may even be possible in Node 8, we could have a pretty reasonable timeline to an unflagged version if we can reach consensus on some of the contentious topics. The main contentious topics still are mostly around transparent interop and module specifier resolution. But there's also a lot of discussion happening right now around hooks and specifically custom loaders and how that could work. If anyone has more questions, please feel free to grab me. I'm more than happy to find some time and get you up to date.
So sorry, just for the notes, main contentious topics is transparent interop, and what was the second one?
Module specifier resolution. For those in the group who haven't been keeping up to date on all the millions of things that are happening on the internet, there's a really interesting proposal right now from Dominic Denicola called the package name maps. I'll drop a link into the chat. But package name maps is a proposal that would allow an install time tooling to generate a manifest that could be consumed by browsers to allow for bare imports of modules in the browser. So you could import Lodash or import anything that's npm installed. The hope of this proposal would be, if we can coalesce some of the stuff around specifier resolution, we should potentially be able to have a path forward for npm installing universal modules that could be used on either Node or the browser without any differences. So Jeremiah is asking if this proposal still resolves modules differently. The resolution algorithm is different. And we are discussing in the module working group if we should be introducing some of those constraints to our ESM loader in either a default loader or as a custom loader. The pluggable loader proposal has the resolution constraints, specifically required extensions and no index.js resolution as proposed constraints on a default loader, and allowing us to ship an extended loader that people could add to their package JSON to progressively enhance their application's loading capabilities. This would not affect CJS or change of any of the resolution algorithms in CommonJS at all, for what it's worth.
Okay, next one is NAPI. So we're continuing the push on the documentation for Node add-on API. Looks like we'll get some good opportunities to promote at Node Summit. We have a workshop and probably a couple of talks accepted. Two other things the team's working on is the proposal for adding new APIs as experimental. So we want to be able to add new APIs, but have them guarded by a define so that we can have some baking time before they become part of the API. And there's also a proposal being worked on for guidance on adding the new API. So basically some principles that say, what kind of API should we or shouldn't we be adding, and some additional sort of, review and sign off type things on that front. So that would require, TSC buy-in if we're going to have, for example, somebody from the NAPI team sign off on new APIs going in. So those are just two things. Next thing is OpenSSL evolution. Rod. Still there, Rod? If you are, you're on mute. Okay, maybe Rod's on mute or is having some trouble, so let's loop back. Workers. So what's new on that front, Anna?
Not much. I haven't gotten around to doing a lot of stuff with it recently. I mean, it's landed and we could include it in the next 10.x release behind the flag or so. So that could work. Other than that, just like ironing up like minor issues.
Okay.
Yeah, more to come in the future.
Sounds good. Okay. Error messages. Do we have? I don't think we had Joy. No. Core Promise APIs. We don't have James. TSC governance. I think we agreed to defer, right, Miles, until the JS Interactive Summit. Was it going to be, or?
Well, so we talked about some of the governance stuff at the last summit, and I can kind of give an update on some of the things that were discussed. It doesn't mean that we're moving forward with them. The main ones that we were discussing around governance, one that was floated was, around code owners or having more decoupled understanding of like parts of the code base. So like we have kind of working groups that own parts of the code base, but maybe it could be code owners. There's definitely mixed feelings on whether or not that's actually a solution moving forward, but it was something that was discussed. Another big thing that we discussed, which I think bleeds into governance, was around our LTS policy and specifically backports. I know that there was an issue opened and I owe it a response, but specifically on kind of changing what our definition of done is. Specifically, we close pull requests now when they land on master. And the discussion was whether or not we should be considering not closing pull requests until all of the backports had been audited, landed, or pull requests opened as necessary. I believe that this does fall under governance because this does change the way in which we would be governing the project itself and considering things landing. But this is maybe a little tangential to that initiative, which may have been more about collaborators. But mostly we're just trying to think about high-level changes that can make LTS a little bit more sustainable and distributed.
Okay. Yeah, I think like that one probably fits more under like LTS governance, but good to have an update anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeremiah, new stream APIs.
Yeah, so there was a bunch of progress around the Collab Summit, which I haven't been able to give an update on yet. There's some NPM modules for this now, fs-source and fs-sync. And there's a bunch more status in the Bob repo, which is still on my GitHub at the current time, so fishrock123/Bob. Yeah, so there's some progress around there, but nothing since the Collab Summit.
Okay. Okay, V8 currency, don't think we have Michael Zaxo, and we don't have Ali for Racing Cooks this week. So that would be our run through of the strategic initiatives. The next issue on the agenda then is add new core modules under a scope. Gonna see if there's anything new on that. We did discuss it, I'm pretty sure, last time too. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in there.
I have lots of opinions and can kick it off if that's helpful.
Sure, I know Jeremiah's commented on it there, so.
So I really think that namespaces are something that we need, and we need to move on faster than we have been. Every time we look to introduce new APIs, the shadowing of things on NPM becomes a blocker for them moving forward. We push some things through. HTTP2 is able to be pushed through. The performance hooks or the performance API stuff was able to be pushed through. Workers is pushed through, but that's solely because it's behind a flag. But aside from that, we have pull requests open for a MIME API. We also have another one for Brotli support. And while those two both independently, need to have more evaluation aside from it, they are strongly blocked on us not having namespaces to put things in. This is also something that blocked our ability to do like FS promises fs/promises and had us put it on fs.promises because of some of the expectations that we have on the non-namespaced API. There's questions about deciding what kind of symbol to use for this. We've gone back and forth on a couple different things. I would like to highly suggest that we consider doing the @Node.js symbol. We have that namespace available to us via NPM. TC39, and I've mentioned this before, but TC39 is looking into namespaces as something that could exist as a language level feature. I brought up the fact that Node was very interested in namespaces at I think this would have been the March meeting. And the advice that I received from the committee was for us to not block on TC39. There are no proposals right now for it, although it is something that's being discussed. It's something I could also bring to TC39 myself and try to push through. But even if I brought it to the next meeting, which I won't be at, even if it came to the July meeting, it would likely be, I mean, the fastest we would probably see something like this land would be 9 to 12 months. And that would be very aggressive. So I don't think that it makes sense for us to block for more than a year out. And I think with the knowledge that another namespace could be coming from the language, our best bet is to move forward with what our ecosystem is already using and to participate in the conversation around what the namespace would be at the standards body and, move forward more wholesale at that point. Matteo had given some pushback about us, moving full forward into the new namespace. And due to that, I think it makes a ton of sense for us to alias the old APIs in the namespace, but to not make that like what we document. So like still keep our document to the non-namespaced APIs for all the APIs that didn't start in the namespace, but to only move new APIs into the namespace. And kind of like moving forward, we would probably want to look at backporting that to our LTS branches so that those aliases are available, but again, not the default or the expected default. We can't simply make it a folder due to security reasons because, and this is one of the things that we would primarily have to think about with the @Node.js/namespace, is that it would very much be possible on versions that don't have the namespaced APIs for people to potentially have modules that could take advantage of that. So there is a security concern there. That's kind of my high level view on all of this. I know that we've been discussing this for over 6 months as something that we want to do. I'm more than happy to help champion and push this forward, but I do think it's something that we need to kind of get moving on. I heard that there might be a pull request open. I tried to find it, but couldn't. Does anybody know if there is currently a pull request open for namespaces?
I haven't seen
I don't
one.
think there is.
Okay, so that must have been miscommunication.
Well, Colin had a PR open for a bit, but it had, so like it wasn't aliasing the modules, it was introducing copies of them, which is, yeah.
Okay.
Slightly different and.
That makes sense. Does anybody have any thoughts or concerns about kind of like the proposal that I just made of how we should approach this? I know, Jeremiah, you had voted, we on Twitter were kind of going back and forth about like, the potential other namespaces being a concern. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I put some thoughts into that thread. Basically, I'd really like to only move to namespaces once. And I'd rather just keep doing things a mostly normal way until we get to namespaces. And then have namespaces probably return either ES modules or ES module compatible stuff, and also return promise-fied async APIs by default, so that we can just do a single move into essentially future stuff rather than have like 3 or 4 or 5 in the end. I don't know. Because we have, I mean, we were talking about like namespacing these modules, but not all the things that we're talking about are even like promise APIs, which people want, and then we need to transfer those again somehow to something else. I don't know. I'd rather just do it less than it seems like we're going to.
But that could be 1.5 to 2 years from now. And that's like my only concern with waiting. Like, and the committee specifically advised us not to wait.
Yeah, I think the counterpoint was how many modules do we think we'll have in that period of time?
Well,
I wouldn't mind having some pushback against just adding every module in the bookend. So
that's my addition to that conversation. Is I don't really like the idea of making it easier for us to add extra stuff into core, like Brotli, Mime. Like these things can exist in userland, and they should do. That's how we do Node, and this push to add more and more stuff to core is really concerning. And I'm not a huge fan of making it that easier. I like there being friction to that. The use case for this, for some kind of extension to our loading, is for promises and other ways to interact with existing APIs. That's what I find most compelling. But I actually don't even think that needs proper namespaces. fs-promises makes sense to me, and that's enough for that kind of support.
I think the net is, like you said, Miles, it's going to require a champion, and there's probably still a ways before we get to consensus.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're going to address it. We're not going to figure it out today anyway.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. Do we believe this needs to stay on the agenda?
I mean, I'll be honest. If we don't think that we're going to reach consensus easily, and it sounds like we have like legitimate objectors, is this something that we should just push to a vote in a future TSC meeting? Or is this something that we should get an implementation together on and try to drive consensus in the issue tracker? And I'm just trying to figure out like if it makes sense to try to move this forward if we have enough people who just don't even think that this should happen to begin with.
I guess my question to you, Mars, would be, do you think that there's been enough engagement from TSC members, aside from this meeting? Has it been covered in other meetings where, and has there been enough engagement, broad engagement from the TSC on the issue tracker?
Mm-hmm.
If not, then let's keep it on the agenda and keep the discussion going. So, I mean, it's not bad to have this discussion repeated in the meeting next week when it's a different time slot and different people attend.
Yeah, as a reminder that it's still important to push forward. That's fine. I was just asking.
I think that the Rod, like what you hinted at, and perhaps there's a bigger issue for us to come up with, is like our core principles around API surface. It sounds like you have legitimate concerns there about the direction that we're going, and that perhaps as a committee, we need to make a decision about what we want to do with the platform in X number of years regarding API surface. And it sounds like that decision will be a key indicator as to like whether or not we need a namespace right now.
So the last time I brought something like this up, like it was kind of just like shelved along with that values thing that nothing ever came out of.
I possibly, but I don't see. I mean, there might be a way to drive that discussion constructively. I'm not sure how you would drive it to a workable outcome. The way I've approached that in the past has simply been, you have many stakeholders at the decision-making level with different values, and those values get to have a discussion, and you come up with an outcome from that. And it's sort of everyone has to compromise kind of thing. But you know, we do have people on the TSC and in the collaborator group that are very strongly small core, and we've got other people who don't care and don't think that that's a good value. And I think having that mix has always been valuable, and it's a good way to drive it forward. But the problem we do have is as the project gets more complex in terms of the number of people, the amount of activity, it's so difficult for each of us to be across everything. Like it's just impossible for most mortals. And so having that conversation is becoming so much more fractured. And I'm not sure how to tackle that. Maybe that does require more strategic discussions. Sorry, Anna, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So I kind of feel like it might make more sense to ask the reverse question of, like, do we have enough engagement from people who are not inside our bubble, and who like from actual users of Node and what they want and think about this? It's like I don't think I have a good feeling for that regarding this issue.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna, like, Rod, as a caveat to the way that you framed it, I just want to say, like, I think, like, for myself, for example, I still value the idea of small core. I think I just have a slightly different idea of what that small core should be and what it should accomplish. And I think Brotli is a really good example of that. Brotli came up in a conversation between me and a stakeholder who has worked at both Netflix and at LinkedIn. And both of those organizations started using Brotli and saw significant improvements in performance for over network like traffic, like 7 to 10% improvement in speed just by switching to Brotli. But it's seen huge hesitation across the ecosystem in adopting it due to complications with native modules and problems with picking a Brotli, a particular Brotli library. And Brotli itself is now supported in every single major library, and as we every single major browser, and as we are often communicating to various different user agents, it seemed to me, that it is a very reasonable thing for us to consider having in our library along with gzip. Now, on the flip side, I recognize that there's many people who think that maybe even having gzip to begin with was a mistake. And so I understand that balance. But I do think, discussions around some of those core ideologies and where we draw those lines and how we make those decisions would be really, at least to me, useful, because I don't think it does anyone a service to have it be something that happens on a per pull request basis based on whoever signed in that day. And very much to what you were saying, Rod, no one can keep track of everything. So when these things start to feel arbitrary, that isn't really fair to the collaborators or the project.
I like that. But I think what I like about that is that what you're saying is that there are different ways to even think about small core. It's not enough to just say, I believe in small core. And so maybe what we need is some kind of forum to have that discussion, or at least have people present what their ideas of small core are. Not necessarily to reach some kind of resolution where we agree this is the outcome, but to just raise those ideas, because it sounds like that's what we're actually, there are those who don't care about small core. I know that, and that's fine. That's a legitimate sector. And there are those of us that care about small core, but even within that, there's a splintering of different ideas about that. And to your point, it sounds like your idea of small core probably leans more towards serving the primary use case of Node applications, which is serving the web. So small core should be able to focus on that. I think that's a legitimate perspective, and it would be worth having that enunciated in some way that others could refer to. And so when we talk about small core, it actually means these different things to different people. So some kind of way to at least have that discussion and raise those ideas would be great. Because I'd like to talk about small core in the sense of Unix philosophy. And that's another way to approach it, but that's kind of different to yours. So I don't know what that is, but yeah.
And there may be other ways of approaching this where it doesn't have to be in core. I mean, one of the things that I personally am really passionate about right now is trying to see how we can better engage in different standards efforts around the language. And us having implementations, at least that we're responsible for, allows us to really engage. But if we don't have stake in the game, if we don't have, if we're not actually implementing these things, it's really hard for us to engage, inform, and influence these decisions, which do eventually affect us.
Right. So maybe I'd suggest we take that as something, as a to-do. Maybe next Collaborator Summit or something, we should try and see if that's a good topic. Unless somebody pushes it earlier. I did want to loop back to Anna's point, though, because she was basically saying, on the front of namespaces, do we need more external input, or have we had enough external input to really be able to make a good decision here?
Is that something the user outreach group or the enterprise outreach group could help with?
I think basically what we need is a set of questions, and then that group could help, work with the foundation to get it out there. But I don't think they would formulate the base questions necessarily. I mean, Anna, do you have a feel for what some of those questions might be? We don't seem to be able to hear you.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
We can we're having two single sentence, right? Yeah, my Wi-Fi is kind of problematic right now. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, it's working better now.
Okay. what I was trying to say is we can basically boil down our problem to a single sentence, which is should Node namespace new modules. Yeah.
And do we think it would be okay?
We can maybe provide more context around that, but I mean, this is the question that we're asking, right?
Yep. And we think, I guess it's, do we think if we put out that one question with some context and, you know, tried to promote it broadly to get an answer, that would be useful if we got like a yes or no? I mean, if it's really that simple a question and we think that that answer is good, we could do that.
It's not a simple question, right? But yeah, it's, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we should take that back to the issue to discuss, you know, maybe doing that in the issue in terms of, you know, it's definitely something we can do if we can come up with, here's what we want to ask the general public and, you know, and how that answer would inform what we do. Okay, we have one more issue on the agenda. So unless people object, I'd suggest we move on to that one. Okay, so that issue is number 121, proposed team discussion policy. I'm just looking to see who added that. Okay, this one was around, I think this was put on the agenda for both the TSC and ComCom. Basically, the PR takes language from the one of our other governance documents that basically says, you know, if you disclose things from the moderation team discussion, there will be confident, you know, basically it says, the details of any issue discussed within are expected to remain confidential and are not to be discussed in any public forum or social media service. Any collaborator found to be violating the privacy of it by repeatedly sharing or discussing the details in discussions, public forums or social media, risk being permanently removed from the Node.js GitHub organization. So it's basically extending the expectations of keeping things confidential from the moderation repo to the Node.js collaborators team discussion board. And the question that I think, I forget who, let's see who exactly added it to the agenda, but I think, you know, the goal was to get more of the TSC's input on, like, do we want something like this, or do we think that that's not reasonable?
I think part of this also was that the discussion board is sometimes defaulted to public instead of private due to GitHub policy. And this was just something to kind of talk about that as well.
What do you mean by defaulted? I'm pretty sure we made this one as limited to just collaborators, and it's a place where collaborators can talk about things where it isn't public.
I'm pretty sure, but I'm not 100% that if you don't explicitly make it private when you create the conversation, that it's readable to anyone in the org, not just collaborators.
Yeah, you may be right about the org.
And so I think specifically, and like this happened in particular, a case was where someone who is on another working group was nominated as a collaborator, and that conversation was public for them to see. And their was potentially notifying them because it was made public by default. So it wasn't explicitly made private, and it pinged other people in the org.
So that's informing the discussion in that maybe it shouldn't be considered private, or?
I think it was more you needed to know to press a button to make it private, but I think that discussion is what led to this.
Okay, well, I guess at this point, You know, the final discussion is that we should have a policy, but it doesn't sound like Benjamin was necessarily going to push it, but hopefully they were looking for somebody to feel strongly enough about it, or one of us, you know, the TC or the ComCom, to feel strongly enough about it to either accept this one or propose something else. And I'm not hearing people jump in, so I think that's maybe not the case.
To be honest, I almost think that the policy that we need more of is around like what topics are appropriate to use the collaborator board for, because I think 99% of the time we are not wanting to have private conversations. Rod, I know you have some thoughts and feelings around that from conversations in the past when I had talked about making a private collaborators repo specifically for this purpose. And we had, you know, kind of aired on, we don't want to be having private conversations as much as possible.
Oh, look, I don't have strong feelings about this. Again, I just think it's, if there's no friction to decrease transparency, then transparency will be decreased. That's all. You know, there's use cases for private discussions, but I can just imagine it, more and more things going there, and it becoming more and more of a closed community. That's all.
I just added a quick comment into that thread, just stating that perhaps we should focus this on what topics should be brought up in that, and that we should be pushing for transparency where possible. Seems like something actionable for that thread to me.
Yeah, I suspect it may just end up being closed if you know, it seemed to me like it was a last ditch. Anybody interested in actually pushing it one way or the other, and if not, it may not go anywhere. But we'll see. We'll see. Maybe that'll trigger a different discussion. Anything more on that topic before we close out for today? Just going to take a quick look to see if we have any questions.
I have one item.
Sure.
Sorry, I may have missed it during the strategic initiatives because I was preoccupied at the time. OpenSSL, there is a pull request number 21282. That's 21282. I'd love somebody else's opinion on this. There is a security issue with OpenSSL at the moment. It's got a CVE. It hasn't been released public. No, the commit, the changes, the details are in the public. It's not in a release of OpenSSL yet because it's low severity. I believe the reason it's low severity is because it requires a malicious server, not a malicious client, and so it's less of a case of being able to take down major servers. It's just a matter of denial of service of a client. However, I think that client SSL is a pretty heavy use case of Node, and maybe we want to consider floating this patch until the next OpenSSL is released. I'm not, you know, I could drop this. I just wanted to raise it to make sure that there's visibility. If anyone else has opinions, I'd love to hear it. It's maybe a patch or release lines.
I did take a look at it, and so the only question that I have is whether this would be typically considered a breaking change if it weren't for security. Like, is there a chance that this is affecting valid use cases, basically?
That is a good question.
By making them error out, and you know.
I believe not.
Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, I can't answer that for sure. We probably need one of our, you know, stronger crypto people to to weigh in. So maybe it's just a matter of trying to get someone of their attention.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we called on you during that, but I think we couldn't hear you or whatever. So
Yes, sorry, I had someone at the door.
Problem. Yep, no problem. Okay. Okay, so let's. I'm just looking at the questions and answers. See if there's anything. There's a few comments. Go ahead.
They've all been being commented in the thread.
Okay. Thread, nothing. Okay. So I'm going to say thanks for everybody who's watching and everybody who's here. I'm just going to stop the stream if everybody can stick around for a few minutes. So just give me a second.